Hello. How are you?
Hey, I'm fine. How are you?
All right. Morgan's here. Hello, Jesse.
Morning.
So a lot of stuff has been posted in various Slack channels. We can go over some of those things.
Okay.
I am still getting together the I'm reaching out to Paola for the paper on the ethical consideration of AI assisted neurostimulation. See how things go with that. So okay, just happy to see where things go. Yeah.
See, there's neuroscience networks. So let's go back into neuroscience networks and see what we have here. All right. I think we'll start maybe up here somewhere. Oh, this is fun. This looks like the Brain GPT stuff from March 23rd. And yeah, I put this in here. Got GPT. There are all sorts of really interesting papers coming out on different types of approaches to like systems neuroscience, and they're kind of linking to large language models and machine learning, which we'll talk about later because I have some references on that that are going to be interesting to look at how they've kind of evolved. This is universal differential equations as a common modeling language for neuroscience. And so this is the image here. So they talk about modeling in terms of black box models, transitioning to white box models. So you have these universal differential equations. You go from a black box model where you don't know what the process is inside, but you know like kind of what the dynamics are and what the inputs and outputs are. And then white box models, which are where you can see the process inside. And so, it becomes less opaque across this. So the most black box model here that they highlight is neural differential equations. And these are kind of where you don't know. So the structure and the parameters are both unknown, which is misspelled, and estimated from data. So this is like a neural network where you're just putting in data and you're getting a set of classifications out, and you don't necessarily know what the mechanism is. You just know that you're getting a bunch of weights. And so, of course, those are not interpretable models, nor do you really know what the substrate is. This epitomizes fully data-driven modeling. This is, the standard data science approach. Then, as you move away from black box models, you have differential equations with residuals. So this is where we have this traditional neural network model augmented with a function approximator to model residual dynamics not captured via the model. And then next we have differential equations with known unknowns, where the structure of the dynamics of that neural network is known, but the values of some parameters are unknown and estimated from data. So this is where we know some of the structure, we know some of the dynamics that we should be getting. So we're not operating in the dark like we are with neural differential equations or differential equations with the residuals. We actually know most of it, but we don't know some of it. And so we're just trying to infer that part that we don't know. So collectively, these middle ones are sort of the gray box that was actually proposed back in the days of cybernetics, where they would have these box and arrow models, and they would have these processes, and they wouldn't know what was in them, but they would use them as sort of a regulator. And so, this is their black box models are kind of these gray box models and then white box models. And sort of the bitter lesson of cybernetics is that, every gray box has some black boxes embedded in it. So even when you work the problem down to some of, to where a fair amount about the structure and the dynamics, you find things you don't know. And so that's, kind of the problem with, modeling the brain, even understanding neural networks. And then the white box model is this differential equation with known structure and parameters. So this is where we know the system, but we don't know the dynamics. We have to derive the dynamics. And this is where we calibrate the dynamics from first principles and domain knowledge. So, we like to use first principles In biochemistry and in physics, we have these ab initio models where you just use first principles to build a model of the dynamics. But you have to know what those are. And first principles just simply means like if you have chemical laws or standard values for equations, that's what you put into the model, and then you get an output. So this is what we think of as mechanistic modeling. And the rest of these are not mechanistic in the sense that we either can't know or don't know all the details. So, you could have emergent models or you could just have simply unknown mechanisms here. So that's a cool paper. That's actually from Guillaume Dumas. And this is a great review and perspective. This is a paper talking about reservoir computing. We talked about reservoir computing, I think, in DeVor a while back, where you're modeling the brain as this reservoir computer, and you're getting different scales of the brain. So you have the micro scale where you have neurons, you have the mesoscale where you have little small networks of neurons connected into a larger network, and then a macro scale where you have those connected into even larger networks. And it's worth thinking about brain networks in this sort of fractal way where you have each node has things within a node and then things within that node. And this summer we're working on some things in EvoWorm related to hypernetworks and hypergraphs, where you have that very structure. You have, an initial network, if we're looking at it at the brain scale, and then you have, say, a neuron, where you have a little patch of tissue, and then within that patch of tissue, you have things that are connected, and then within that patch, within those connections, you have things within that. So it's working down in scale and representing everything within the node in different ways. And then, of course, with this multi-scale approach, they plug everything into these reservoir computers, which are, of course, where you have these sort of randomly connected networks of nodes. You get an input layer and a readout module, so it's like a conventional neural network, except that you want to basically train it to get some structure at the end. And so it's I can't. If you want to talk about black box models, reservoir computing is really one of those, because you don't know at the beginning what the structure is. You're just kind of trying to get some emergent structure and get an output, given some input. And then, of course, so that's a reservoir computing part. The reservoir has these components, these different activation functions, these different types of behaviors, and different first principles like neural mass models. And then that leads us to computational phenotyping of network structure, applications to understanding lifespan, individual differences in behavior, network perturbations. So what happens if I exercise or get injured or I get old or I forget, I guess, these little figures down here. And then, of course, evolution. How does the brain vary between species? So that's a pretty that's a pretty ambitious project there. Jesse posted this on the transmitter. That's, I guess, a site where this is neurons making memory shush their neighbors. So this talks about how neurons kind of silence their neighbors and building memories and building these short, small networks that are encoding things at the synapse level. So when neurons strengthen their synapses, they infect surrounding cells with a virus-like protein to weaken these cells' excitatory connections, according to a new preprint. And then Morgan said fascinating stuff. We have a lot of really interesting things with respect to quantum computing, using quantum computing to infer dynamic behaviors of biological and artificial neural networks. This one, functionality of arousal regulating brain circuitry at rest, predicts human cognitive abilities. So this is about arousal and how some of these things are regulated and what's going on there. An algorithm for neuronal wiring, unraveling the mystery. This is from the INRIA blog, I guess, from their featured in one of their papers. So in a paper published in the journal Physical Review Letters, these researchers outlined a breakthrough in our understanding of the development of the architecture of natural brains. The research has shown that the connections between nerve cells inside living organisms follow simple algorithmic rules that can be modeled. So this is where, we want to infer how brains get wired in development, how brains change their wiring and plasticity and under those conditions. And so we can actually extract different principles from that. So some of the principles that people have proposed have been age of the cell. If the cell is born, then it gets connected. There are other rules as well. So this is kind of an interesting paper in that respect. This is not something it's an easy problem. We have to kind of figure out from data how a neuron knows what other neuron to connect to and maintain that connection. And of course, it has relevance not only to development, but learning and memory. This innovative concept in complex systems paves the way for exciting clinical applications that could help to deepen our understanding of the progression of neurodegenerative diseases or how people recover from strokes. So this is really interesting. I'll maybe open that up a little bit. We can look at it. So this is the, so they're searching for an evolutionary algorithm. It looks like it was some sort of dissertation, but this was, this is the Physical Review Letters paper here, Exploration Exploitation Paradigm for Network Biological Systems. So they're talking about exploration versus exploitation and those kind of trade-offs. So in order to survive, these systems are forced to choose configurations which produce optimal functions, which can be summarized as configurations which maximize their capacity to survive in their environment. And of course, that's what we're interested in evolution and in metabolism more generally. They're also governed by functional constraints, resulting from the laws of physics, time, and energy, all of which dictate evolutionary compromises. As a result, analyzing biological systems remain a significant challenge for those researchers seeking to model such systems. So we need to grasp how sort of this neural network or neurons within the network explore their space of possible configurations or a functional landscape in order to discover new things. That's exploration. And then how to identify optimal states corresponding to specific biological functional requirements, which enable them to survive, and that's exploitation. So this is this balance. And then, of course, you can use C. elegans for this because you have a very small number of neurons and you know the connections. And so that's an interesting set of things here. So this is the worm connectome, where you have these networks that change their shape. You get over these observation points, so from 0 to 45 hours. So the worm is, I guess this is from birth, or, kind of the birth point of, so this is L1, which is a developmental stage. So E is the embryo. They're not looking at the embryo, they're looking at when the worm hatches, so that's 0 hours. Then they're looking at the L1 developmental stage, the L2 developmental stage, L3, L4, and then the adult up to 45 hours. So, during this time, all the neurons are in that network, or most of the neurons. There are a few neurons that are born post embryogenesis, and they're changing their connections throughout development. Especially larval development, because they're encountering a lot of different things in their environment. There is some of that post-embryonic plasticity, and so it's a really interesting time to look at that problem. And then, of course, in the adult, you do get changes in the connections. You don't get changes in the number of cells, but you do get changes in the connectivity depending on what the environment of the worm is, and aging even can affect that. So this is a really interesting paper. I'm not sure what kind of data set they have. It'd be kind of interesting to look at the data set in this paper. So I don't know if they have a link to the paper directly, but we know what the paper is now, so we can take a look at that later. It might be interesting to devorm. So this is a seminar from Paul Cizek. This is the MindCore seminar, and this is kind of talking about functional decomposition of the mind. It looks like he's got one of his trees that he likes to put in his slides. So that's an interesting talk from Penn MindCore, their lecture series. We have this paper from Nature, Alignment of Brain Embeddings and Artificial Contextual Embeddings and Natural Language Points to Common Geometric Patterns. And so this is kind of what they're getting at here is they're trying to find they're trying to make a connection between large language model embeddings and looking at activity patterns in the frontal gyrus or inferior frontal gyrus and trying to discover a common neural code for language. So we look at the figure, we have this sampling of brain embeddings, we have these two areas of the inferior frontal gyrus and the precentral gyrus, and we go across participants. Then we have this zero-shot mapping where we look at the training set and the testing set, where I think this is, I don't know if this is in a language model, I guess it is. It's a GPT-2, where you sample a single occurrence of each word in the story, and then you get, so you could do this, I guess, with a participant or with a model. Basically, you have this training set and this testing set, or this training period and this testing period. So you're training it on sampling a single occurrence of each word in a story, and you're looking at brain activity, you're looking at the model activity, and then you're looking at these embeddings. So we can compare between GPT-2 and inferior frontal gyrus. We have this zero-shot decoding using non-overlapping words. We have this alignment between encoding and decoding. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to align these two types of models. So we can see that the this feature space in the GPT-2 and this space in the brain embedding space in the inferior frontal gyrus, they're not, I guess they're not aligned exactly. I don't know how they map these factors between each model, the model and the brain, but basically, if I take this as like a naive viewer, these words are in different positions or locations in this embedding space. So I'm assuming that there is not necessarily alignment here, although I don't know. So non-human, for example, it's shifted between GPT-2 and the inferior frontal gyrus. Copyright. So a lot of these are shifted in different ways, but it just shows like the comparison between these two spaces. So that's interesting work. We'll talk more about large language models later in the meeting. This one, Taming the Neuroscience Literature with Explanatory and Predictive Models. This is where we have we're using Brain GPT, which we've had some great fun with, and talking about the different types of flavors of GPT that are coming out now. And, looking at the neuroscience literature and kind of getting a handle on the different categories and, being able to prompt different terms and see what comes out, different resources. So that's interesting stuff. That's a video that Morgan posted.
He's even trying to get at being able to find counterfactual articles. Like I've got this theory, and allow the large language model to kind of give you pros and con literature searches, and certainly the idea being that at some point it acts as an aid, right? Like it acts as a kind of scientific aid, and whether it's there or not, but certainly that was a big part of his talk.
Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds like something I well, and I could maybe do a lot better with GPT, you know, like.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a lore. I mean, the other thing that's nice about it is his discussion of what are the techniques to fine tune a model to be appropriate for neuroscience, or to be appropriate as a neuroscientific aid.
Right.
You know, um,
Yeah, like I said, we'll talk more about GPT or at least large language models later in terms of their, like, well, we'll see what I'm going to get into.
sure.
It's interesting stuff.
The last paper in Neuroscience Networks is what I would say is by some of the people who brought us, you know, these gradients, and yeah, a lot of this work in gradient stuff.
Okay.
The last one. I mean, this is interesting, and that's a breakdown of the.
This one here.
I mean, like all the way at the bottom. Like
okay.
most recent. Yeah.
So this one
has
here.
like Daniel Margulis in terms of.
Okay. This one.
Yeah. Like, you know, he was sort of instrumental in the first, you know, structural gradients, structural and functional gradients, I should say.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was interesting to see too.
Yeah, this is organizational gradients. So yeah, we should talk about this one then. So this is about gradients in. I guess this is in brain, like in the brain, not in our models.
Right.
So this is
right. Yeah, this is definitely more kind of like a typical structural functional analysis paper.
Right. Yeah. So this is Canonical Neurodevelopmental Trajectories of Structural and Functional Manifolds. This is the CALM team, which is out of Cambridge, I guess. Yeah, and then people associated with that. So this is where they're talking about organizational gradients, which are these continuous low-dimensional embeddings of brain regions. And this allows us to quantify core organizational principles of human brains or complex systems more generally. So they're focused on the brain here, sort of the structural functional studies that we can do. Mapping how these organizational principles are altered or refined across development and other phenotypes. So, you know, in development, we get these changes that occur, but also during plasticity or during learning and memory. We can look at different things and how the brain is altered, and you give it a perturbation and it responds. And we should be able to use these techniques to get these organizational principles sort of extracted, or at least put everything in a common framework. Taking a developmental approach and leveraging longitudinal and cross-sectional data, and this is from 2 multimodal neuroimaging data sets, spanning the full neurotypical neurodivergent continuum. So we have a lot of data sets from neurodivergent populations, but also data sets from your neurotypical populations. We charted the organizational variability of structural and functional gradients across childhood and adolescence. Across data sets, despite different phenotypes, we observe highly similar structural and functional gradients. So we have 2 different types of gradients. We have the structural gradient and then the functional gradients. The structural gradient is like the connectivity via,
It's both T1s and diffusion.
Okay, yeah. And so, these gradients, organizational principles, are highly stable across development. So this is like the C. elegans paper. It's a very different system, but we have these kind of organizational principles throughout development that are actually somewhat, there are a number of them that are highly stable. If you just say look at connectivity on its face, but also if we take an embedding and we look at it, we can also discover these principles with the exact same ordering across early childhood and mid-adolescence. However, there is substantial developmental change in the strength of the embedding within those gradients. So this is where the embedding strength changes within the gradient, or the embedding strength changes within the gradient by modeling developmental trajectories as nonlinear splines. We show that structural and functional gradients exhibit sensitive periods that are refined across development. So this is where we get this. We can identify critical periods using this type of approach. The gradients are established early in life, refined through development, and their coupling is a robust predictor of working memory. We look at the PDF so we can see maybe some of these figures. This is kind of the sensitivity of these gradients. So let's see if we can look at this a little bit more in depth. So we have these different types of networks. We get the structural connectome, the structural affine. Same thing for the functional connectome and the functional affine. We get this connectivity matrix. We normalize by a diffusion parameter alpha. We then use a random walk to sort of find the transition probabilities. We then do an eigen decomposition where we find sort of the orientation of the different eigenvectors. And then we put this into this space and we end up with the gradient. And so we get a sense of, we're doing a lot of transformation of the data and finding the sort of principal components of variation, and we're putting this in a common space. And so, I'm kind of glossing over this, but
it's what's again, like Margulis, who's one of the authors, kind of started this trend in gradient-based approaches.
Yeah.
And this is the first paper, this looks like, his work applied to a neurodevelopmental data set, or in this case, to the neurodevelopmental data set. Yeah. So the NKI and COM are just two kind of like, looks like 500 subjects data sets ish. And if you scroll just a little bit more, you can just see the that's the he's using like a 200 parcel parcellation. So that's how you make that matrix. It's probably like a 200 by 200 matrix. You are taking like very small regions, and then using something like that at that each of those locations, like again, this diffusion map embedding, got some interesting properties.
Right.
I still don't know why they're not using the Child Mind Institute, because they've got, again, like that one's got like 3,000.
Yeah.
But I can ask them about that.
Oh yeah, it'd be great. This is sort of the functional and structural embedding if you compare them. Yeah. And you have these.
It's the structural diffusion and then the resting fMRI.
Right. And then you have the coupling between structure and function. So there are a lot of things you can do here, where you have you can make a connection between when structure and function are coupled, when the embeddings are very similar, and you can extract some principles out of that.
And those are the labels, kind of it's kind of well-known dominant networks, the 7 networks that are typically extracted from resting these, DMN, default node network, salience, things like that.
Yeah, that's let's see. So that's that paper. And we have some other Hussain posted on this GitHub repository, AI-powered 3D face detection and rotation tracking. So this is a lot of stuff with face description, body pose tracking, hand finger tracking, etc. is this a data set or is this a yeah, this is kind of a set of demos, I guess.
Does remind me of the Lisa Barrett Feldman.
Yeah.
The talk that she gave, talking about her kind of academic career and how, as a young researcher, she was sure she was going to finally solve the emotion problem by doing face processing right.
Oh, right.
and, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it looks like they have.
She found that it was more complicated.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like they have a demo. I'm not going to run it, but you can capture your face. You can run different models, and that's it. Or anything you put in the camera's view, I guess. Or you can process images. That's the nice demo, and then this is software that kind of allows you to do this too. So that's really interesting. This is the human library. So yeah, allows you to do a lot of the stuff and execute it either in a web demo or like on process it more fully. So yeah, you can do all sorts of things. Build an Electron app, or do some virtual model tracking. So it's great stuff. Yeah, it's one thing in neuroscience a lot of people don't think about is like tracking the body and the sort of embodied aspect of it. But yeah, it's we have the Brain Image Library, a community contributed microscopy resource for neuroscientists. So this is, I guess, just kind of like taking a lot of these data sets and putting them into a library. Things like the Brain Initiative Cell Census Network, which is where we have a lot of different whole brain images, and we can look at different neuronal circuitry patterns and cell phenotypes, and we just need to organize it.
Yeah, the How to Grow Almost Anything course that Celsius has been teaching, or I should say Elliot Roth has been teaching. We did the microscopy component this week, and there's some great resources. If you're highly recommend Fiji.sc, which is kind of like the ImageJ batteries included version, and then just lots of there's more and more kind of these. I don't want to call them foundation models, but just databases that are becoming coming online.
Yeah,
and I haven't looked at that the discussion that we had in the Data Viz channel about I think it was the Allen Institute Cell Atlas. Anyway, I haven't tried the Zura responded about or was asking if we'd actually tried some of the Allen Institute tools for looking at that data set.
Oh yeah, I haven't gotten into this. And then of course circling back to NeuroGPT.
Oh yeah, this is great.
Yeah, Hussain put this link to the GitHub here, where it's like the NeuroGPT sort of their stuff that they have here.
This is a great group from USC, and Richard Leahy being the last author, who's one of the kind of original developers of Brainstorm. So widely used MATLAB source imaging package, and this is awesome. I think they've trained off of if you scroll down, is it the Temple University Hospital?
Let's see.
Yeah, okay, data sets. Yeah. So TUH is Temple University Hospital, EEG corpus, and then BCI competition, I think, is like it's an old. That's kind of an old data set. The TUH data set is pretty large. very long clinical recordings. So I think this is, I mean, this is awesome, and it's awesome that they've released everything. I would be interested to talk about how we decide whether something's a foundation model or not.
Yeah.
Like again, the people who've been using this term have been mostly using text.
Right.
Which is, like the largest amount of data that we have.
Yeah.
And it would be good to use with the kind of competition in large language models right now.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see Charles Martin's kind of analysis of the weight matrices using his Weight Watchers tool. So he's using some of his statistical mechanics background or condensed matter physics backgrounds to talk about the he can look at the training in interesting physics ways.
Yeah.
And I think it would be good to do the same thing with some of the EEG foundation models. I think it's fine to call them models. I hesitate to I don't know if you'd want to take these particular models and apply them, fine tune them for language or something like that, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But again, like, not sure I've got the definitions correct. But this is really interesting, what these guys done.
Yeah. So briefly, they're taking EEG data, which are signals, and they're putting it into this encoder, and they're getting learned embeddings, and they have a mask as well, and then they're feeding it into a GPT model, which takes it embeddings and optimizes, and I guess puts what does it output? Like some sort of reconstruction loss of the data, or they train it with data, but do they do a query of the model, or do you know what the?
I'm not the. Yeah, I would need. I'd like to look at this more. Because it's from Leahy's group, I'm sure they're doing something good.
Yeah.
But it's saying we fine tune the model on the motor imagery task. So it's the BCI competition 2A data set that's down there, the second data set.
Right.
I got us, I know it. We use it in MOAB, which is the mother of all BCI benchmarks. And, it's not a big data set. So, but it's fine tuning, right? So you at least know what they're trying to do with it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're trying to get, like, they have a lot of data. They want to be able to get a good, I guess.
Oh, yeah. They'd say that it's a nine subjects. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you can have a lot of training data, but you have to have something with good discernible features in order to be useful. If it doesn't really have the features you want, then it's not going to be a very good training set. I mean, so, just throwing data at it isn't necessarily the answer. It's having good structured data is better, I guess. But yeah, the foundation model, we've been through that about, the definition of those and what qualifies as a foundation model and all that.
Well, I mean, so are they using large language model there? Sounds maybe they are. Is it and a GPT model?
They call it GPT. I guess a GPT model. Yeah, they don't really specify which version. I mean, there are a lot of different large language models. I guess GPT is just kind of like the generic form of the different versions that have come out. And again, you're with a GPT model, you have like basically some weights and some structure inside, and you want to they basically with GPT say 3 or 4, they train it with language. The idea is you're finding sequences and you're putting together things from sequences, and that's what they're doing here. We've talked about these with respect to DNA. People have used DNA sequences or protein sequences even, and plugged them into large language models, and they're able to reconstruct things. So if you query it with, it's kind of like in bioinformatics, we developed all these tools where you can like query a gene sequence, and given like a full genome, you can find the location of the candidate locations of that sequence, and that's those models are, I guess the idea is they can be improved with a large language model, and that's kind of maybe the principle here is where you have these EEG signals that can be treated as sequences, and you build a set of tokens and embeddings, and then you can put like a bunch of candidates. Like if you have like canonical EEG sequences, you can make those as the output, and you can basically predict if you have any sequence. You can predict maybe the state of if it's a sleep state or something else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I need to give this paper more time.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and so it's also got it's got Karen Jerby as well. And so yeah, Karen was I think did a sabbatical with Richard Lee.
Yeah.
So this might have been the yeah. So I just need to figure out how they're using the GPT, or whether they're just using kind of the transformer part there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry,
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Trying to figure it out.
So, I think we have a lot of interesting stuff in here. I'm not going to get into any more of it because we're in the interest of time. Did you have something you wanted to highlight, or?
Of neuroscience networks, well, just wanted to say, I don't know if I talked about MedArc before, but that's a really interesting, community online that is working on some fMRI. Let's call it foundation models.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of an ML. It's an open ML community that is. I don't want to say has the backing of, but it's got some people associated with Stability AI.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've heard of this.
And yeah, like I'm blanking on his name right now, but Paul Scotty is the head of neuroimaging and AI at Stability AI.
Okay.
And they've got, I think I might have talked about they're working on a brain transformer model, and what they mean by that is really like, can they develop a neuro AI or a neuro inspired AI model that's on some metrics is better, and just would point people to that and say that there's people working on a foundation fMRI model, people working on some image, some some other kind of community projects under that on that server.
Yeah.
That look really interesting, and one of those that I really want to highlight is the ECOG one. So there is a lot of ECOG data. So that's these would be invasive recordings.
Right.
But yeah, and the next meeting for that is June 3rd. and just join the server. You can check out their Notion that has notes from their previous meetings, and I think it's really interesting. Seems to be stability's. It's like stability's Notion, but it's MedArc. It's MedArc ECOG Foundation model. You can check it from their events page or something like that. I've got to learn my Discord terminology as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that's interesting. Definitely. And like Stability AI, they like run their whole thing off of a Discord server. So it's kind of.
Oh, okay.
You didn't know that? Yeah. I don't know how it actually works, but like that's the basis of like a lot of their community and things. I'd like to see more examples using Discord. Yeah.
I think they've got a pretty good. That might explain why their Discord seems is quite a well run ship.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the former head. He gave an interesting talk as well. The former head of Stability seems to be applying his, he's left. He's no longer CEO, but I think he's doing some work that's somewhat bio-focused, somewhat mental health focused. That I thought was really interesting. Sorry, I'll see if I can find that talk.
Okay.
But I did want to talk a little bit about the Foresight whole brain emulation workshop that was this week.
Okay.
And it was, it was very AI alignment focused. I should say, and I knew that going in. So I wouldn't say, I'd say maybe like 1/5 of the talks were kind of, perhaps like brain imaging focused, or not sure what the right terms are for it. But I think there is a big disconnect in terms of what is extractable from neuroimaging.
Really?
And well, there was a lot of focus on pricing out in a kind of back of the envelope way what it would take to get like nanometer resolution connectomics. And Phil Hsu was there, who was on that Flywire AI paper that had done some work using Drosophila connectomics, and how much functional representation can you achieve from structural connectomics, right? And and I think that was also problematic in terms of its like the lessons learned there. But the main thing being that like there was a lot of discussion of using large scale fMRI data sets, and not enough understanding that fMRI is a statistical mapping technique.
Yeah.
Like we're definitely not doing microscopy.
Right.
And it just not being really clear what information would come from that, like other than kind of foundation models for fMRI researchers. And then when the discussion turned to, well, should we be using EEG? And again, there's this popular popular idea that EEG represents brain activity, right? Which it does in the sense that it represents the electrical activity of some of the brain,
Right.
right? But it's super important to remember that it's like we talk about it as being the mass action
Right.
of a particular cell type, right? So it's not even like what's the like the data set that we're talking about in data viz is like 3,000 cells or
Right.
something like I mean, that's maybe to like a mouse or something, but maybe let's say that's human, right? Like we're looking at 1 out of 3,000 cells. And we can maybe talk about its connectivity to 2 other cell types,
Right.
in terms of a Janssen-Ritt model. Then we usually have 3 cell types in a Janssen-Ritt model. You know, we are not representing the brain activity.
Right.
You know, and there wasn't enough. You know, it's yeah, like what we're trying to extract with dynamic causal modeling or techniques like that, where you're inferring physiology from the electrical signal. It has to be the physiology that's tied directly to one of those 3 cell types.
Right.
Right? We're making very limited. I mean, dynamic causal modeling is all about shrinking your expectations,
Right.
in a principled way,
Right.
so that you can make model based, so that you have model based analysis, as opposed to what had been traditional in event related potential research, which was kind of this wave shaped phenomenology.
Right.
And it was really, Friston, pioneered extracting, like again, physiological, information extraction from these far field non-invasive signals, which again I think is awesome. But like that is not giving us, a complete picture of the brain activity.
Right.
So anyway, it was good. I still, I don't know if we're going to have much success with so they are offering grants,
Okay.
and I'm pitching organoid intelligence
Okay.
as a stepping stone. that as the organoid intelligence is a research program, that is attainable, grounded, like extending our compute to include biology would be a necessary first step towards any kind of whole brain emulation,
Right.
And or at least as I said to many at the meeting, like I'm working on my pitch. I don't know if it's convincing. I talked to Phil Shue about it, who's getting the first author on that Berkeley paper, and he said, as a former developmental neurobiologist, I don't think that's possible. Like, ouch. Okay.
Yeah.
But that was cool, and it was great to see a bunch of people in person. Like I'd never met Adam Saffron before.
Yeah.
And it's he said that he doesn't. He started as a neuroimager, but he hasn't. That's not kind of what he does these days.
Right.
And so I don't know, but I do think I might see him at. Excuse me. He asked about being in Tokyo around this, around just after HBM, and I've got a new University of Tokyo student NeuroTech chapter. So I think we're gonna meet up, and he'll we'll at least host a talk for him or something like that. So that was really great. I got to meet Logan. Oh yeah. There's Boston. Boston's a big chapter.
But no, I'm glad you got to meet Adam and Logan. So
Logan. Yeah. So
circle's complete somewhat for the lab.
I got to have lunch with Logan, and I think I got him on board in terms of seeing organoids as a very necessary first step. And I think it helps that he's so molecularly focused. In terms of it's mostly like gene therapies, and he was pitching a great program in terms of electron microscopy and expansion microscopy and EM, or like high res EM. That I still want to talk to him more about in terms of the kind of light sources that he needs for that EM, is the kind of things that you only kind of find at national labs. But I think that'd be really, really interesting to actually. I think I own a paper on something on that. But that was great. Patrick Minot, so CTO of Neuromatch. Yeah. And it was cool too, because some people were also like, "Oh, you exist." Like you're not like I only know you online too. So that was great. And Pamela Douglas is someone that I knew of via the main Montreal AI and neuroscience meetings. I think she was a keynote speaker, and she's doing TFOS now, transcranial focused ultrasound, and so that is awesome for a group that we're going to have meeting here in San Francisco. That's the second student of Mark Cohen's that I've met or heard about in recent days. So this is interesting. And I'm trying to think any other outcomes from that. So because I was pitching organoid intelligence, the few people who knew what I was talking about and came up, and one of those is a UCLA student, and he's going to Michael Levin's lab this summer. Okay. Yeah. So I'm hoping to keep in touch with him also here. Yeah, as Michael expanded his interest to include organoids at this point. But it was really great to talk to him about what he's been doing himself. Just like he's built quite a setup in his garage or his apartment. Oh wow! Really interesting. Sort of in the kind of dish brain level, like not organoid culture, but say 2D neural network, right? So it's a bit more than just neurons in a dish. Like there's a certain amount of structure. Anyway, that was great. And following up from the Discord, from the Cortical Labs Journal Club a week ago, I'll be meeting with one of the students that presented there too. So he's one of the undergrads of the brain engineers at UCSC. So it was definitely good to go to the meeting. I did have to, I've got a lot to say about AI alignment.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know if that's, this isn't maybe the venue, but yeah, and I'm going to stop there.
So yeah, I know you had put some things in the Slack. So what channel was that where they where you had the images from the event?
Oh, Cognition Futures, I think.
All right.
And
yeah, here we go.
Yeah, the
this is Adam Safran.
Yeah, there's Adam.
Yeah.
And Adam's great. I mean, there he's pitching his his take on. I think he had the closest to our kind of developmental AI approach. But it was very much about how like development or like raising a child. How do you instill empathy and the how do you instill the values that you want your child to have?
Is he mentioned like any like projects that he's doing with that, or is he just
so as I said in my notes, like I felt like he made a pitch for just the difficulty of this in terms of like we shouldn't be surprised this is difficult because we don't really know how best to do it with our own children. And and that everybody's talking about these these quite high goals in terms of things, right? And that like it would obviously, but then he was really saying like, if you are doing something along these lines, or if you're doing something with large language models that really speaks to their ability to capture world models, please get in touch because I've got this special issue. I've got this RFP. I forget what he calls that. Is it a special issue?
Yeah, it's like he had mentioned that they're doing the special issue and they're going to do like 2 installments. So they're trying to get like as many papers as they can, and but yeah, it's like a special, I guess, compendium.
And it was a good time to pitch that because it's, again, like this meeting was super heavy on AI, AI related or adjacent people, and not so much neuroimagers.
Right.
But there were some people that were kind of doing neuro AI,
right?
Or some good examples. I didn't know Anders Sandberg. Should I know?
Yeah, I don't know, but
okay. Anyway, I liked again like Adam's pitch. As I like the whole RFP, or at least the papers that he's got listed there. In terms of how much of a world model is developed by a large language model, and how usable is it as an aid for like discovery.
Right. So yeah, this whole idea of
Marcus Kaiser was on there.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I didn't. Yeah,
he didn't see him there.
I should get in touch with him. But Andrew Payne was there. Yeah, E11 Bio. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some people doing. I didn't see Max there. Okay. This is. I should have looked at this, but
Yeah, there are a lot of
yeah.
interesting people here.
Oh yeah, I mean, so great. Oh yeah, Sharina, of course. It was a lot of, you know, a lot of great people. I didn't see John Cumbers there, but I did see some AE studios.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was it was nice as to pitch organoid intelligence there.
Yeah. So this whole brain emulation thing is kind of fascinating. I mean, the history of it is kind of science fiction-y, but like, what I mean, do they have like sort of is it a unified field, or is it just kind of this pie in the sky idea, or what's going on with that?
Well, I think it's one of those things where you know it's like AI safety, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just like there's actually like 1,000 ideas of what that is,
Right.
or you know, and you know, you say alignment, and it's just like, okay, what do you mean by alignment? And you know, there was Lisa Theogert. Forgive me if I got her last name wrong, but the she was saying that what we mean by AI alignment is actually the benchmark that we're proposing, right? Which I thought was much more practical.
Right.
I would much prefer us to be talking about the particular, but you know, like again, like that's we can't see into these models. So obviously, what you're actually talking about is what are the metrics that you're using.
Right.
And it was also nice to see her because she's she started the Neurotech chapter in Germany.
Okay.
So it was nice to see some more Neurotech people there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and Randy Cohn with carbon copies, like you know, together with he had an archive paper that he did with Logan right, but like the day before the workshop, like hit archive.
Yeah.
And you know, and like their proposal was, you know, super imaging focused. You know, it was a very grounded physics proposal, or you know, physics plus expansion microscopy. So whatever you want to call that kind of, you know, molecular approach to change the cells and and make everything more imageable, right? Make the structure more imageable is a very practical proposal. I would just say that like that was, you know, it's still like a connectomics proposal, right?
Yeah.
Where it's a structural imaging proposal, you know, and that what I was trying to say was that like you know, imaging does not equal physiology,
right?
And that what we're, you know, what I see microscopists doing is trying to is trying to use molecular and cellular techniques to highlight very small aspects of physiology, right? You know, it's like that's as best they can do with, you know, advanced is like four chromophores or something like that, you know, and so you're taking just a very narrow slice of physiology and kind of highlighting that, or you know, trying to fix down a number of other things so that you can highlight, say, something concrete about a little bit of physiology. And you know that X-ray is just not even coming close to that, you know. But it was good, you know, like again, like Logan, you know, is super, yeah, he's super smart and super, you know, like super receptive to new information. So he wasn't familiar with Big Brain Project, so I think it would be great for him to spend some time with that data set and see like how much can you get from, you know, big brain exists, right? So there's one brain at this kind of resolution, that exists, what can you what can you do Flywire like? Yeah, he's totally he's smart. He's a smart cookie. And like I don't see enough. I mean, I don't see, the like last big brain project meeting in Iceland. Like, I don't think anybody was trying to infer function or physiology from the images, right? It was still very much a catalog,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's yeah, it's always a problem. Like, we have a lot of these atlases, and they're just kind of like catalogs. It's like you look up something, you characterize something. There isn't any more like analysis than that, and like the analysis is really kind of the standard analysis if you do an analysis. So it's kind of like, what are the ways that we can uncover the physiology? It almost suggests that we need new analyses to be brought to bear, or have tools that would allow us to make sort of easy to make statements. So you could just plug in like an analysis and say, this is what's going on with these data. If you ask a question and you can get an answer. Maybe that's not maybe that's a little bit, there's a caveat there, which is that we don't want a analytical model we can't observe. We can just ask a question and then it's an uninformed answer. But no, I mean, like, a lot of the atlases are still at the stage of just kind of describing what's there, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. That was, like I thought it would be good for him to look at some of the talks about big brain and just like they're actually dealing with this kind of data. What are the problems that they need solving right now? And as well as kind of pitching the James Glazier, et al. Open virtual tissue umbrella, right? So like CompuCell 3D, PhysioCell, Morpheus, all these tools that are would be, again, like a necessary first step towards trying to go from trying to give structure, agency, and physiology, right? Anyway, that was
So yeah, that's great. So I'd like to move on to like Jesse had Jesse had an update here. So he said, snippets of updates from me. Lots of work on JoePro administratively. So yes, I'm glad to see JoePro coming back into the view. We've been doing a lot of stuff with our open source meetings. Yesterday we had a very good meeting where we had a lot of people presenting on their work, which is good. And we're going to be doing that over the course of the summer, where we're going to have, we're just going to really kind of get our ideas out there, and hopefully it'll drive some work, and we can have some good things by the end of the summer. But I think JoePro is an essential part of that because, there is this mentorship aspect that I want to cover, and I want people to know kind of these professional norms and aspects of things like that. So there's mentoring work and development. Also, I'm appreciating the break from Cognition Futures. Yeah, we've taken a break from Cognition Futures, and Jesse's had, he's trying to finish up his program and other things. So I think that's a good, break. We can take some perspective on what we've done in the last year. We've done a lot of stuff there in that group, and we kind of moved from reading to reading. But I think going back and reflecting on it a little bit is important. The Inclusive Gaming Conference has yielded a lot of positive contacts. Yeah, that's good. Plot Twisters is still on break, but looks to do more later in the summer. So yeah, I guess did we ever publish the Inclusive Gaming Conference blog post?
That's one thing that it's basically ready. I just have to submit it to the Medium, but yeah, that continues to be. I know I kind of talk about it maybe glowingly, but it's um, just because there's some other things I'm trying to do through Joe Pro that people from there fit well with. So that's been really great, but also I think it will. It's interesting to talk about plot twisters right now because there's sort of this. Um, it could be a huge summer, but like I can only predict or say or allude to or do so much right now. So it's kind of this. It's kind of
Yeah.
this like I'm kind of on this holding pattern about it. But like I'm really so much. I'm so glad that I went to that event. It just has had so much good stuff continuing to come from it. And I'm kind of like having to disseminate it very. I almost feel like I'm laundering like money. Like I feel like I'm laundering outputs from it very slowly. But like it's been a great thing. Um, excuse me. And more about Plotfish as it comes to. But the post will be there. I think maybe next week I'll submit it or over the weekend, Memorial Day, whatever stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
and then I guess the last part of that was Nickwick. It's been interesting and fun experience to chair a very small conference or be. I'm like the lowest. At least like I'm kind of along for the ride in terms of being the co-chairs. Like there's people much more experienced than I am there, but it's been great to see what that's like and then deal with the venue. It's interesting because Nick was specifically has a very specific venue sort of requirements. So like that part of why and how does it relate to being a first time event and the community that we're trying to serve and the region. Like all these factors are at play. But it's exciting because you see people who are, and this can kind of tie into, um, you know, one of the things I want to do with Joe Pro also is not just a mentoring service, but also it's like mentor training, like training other mentors in certain things, and building off of some of our pedagogical, like a lot of things. Just to put this sort of on the record, or to say this in an acknowledgement sense, like long before, um, well, we don't really talk about it as much in the last year, but there's sort of the educational banner of the lab. We would do, like all the stuff about mind maps, all the stuff about teaching, and that was like a major thing. It wasn't like I feel I know we kind of mentoring and Joe Pro, we kind of throw them together now, but like that's something that's been here for a long time, and I've always appreciated that. And I had the good fortune of a long time ago participating in a very, very good, like just general leadership development program when I was an undergraduate. And there's just sort of this interesting evolution of things that's happening in that space. And I feel like I'm looking to tailor some of the stuff that I'm doing, not just for like, oh, you can like sign up and get mentorship stuff or like be a mentee, like almost like a Google Summer of Code, like not just be a contributor, but like how do you how do you deal with being a mentor as well specifically? And that's something that's come about a little bit more recently as things I want to pursue. Um, so nothing to really say about that right now, but I think that's something that I see a lot of doubling back over things that we've done in the past in the lab. A lot of our, eventually the things we'll discuss during the open source, and even here in the Saturday meetings too. But open source Friday discussions too will weave into that. But just like that's what's happening, and then also like I'm deciding to like really update Joe Pro's like website and web presence, like we've talked about the DSM project a lot, but formalizing that into okay, like there's a new structure I'm trying to do a lot of things with Joper with. Is it's not just mentoring. There's sort of a whole set of I'm basically going to call them working groups. Like Cognition Futures is kind of like the original one.
Yeah.
Like that essentially a model for things that I'm going to be doing with a bunch of other topical areas. And a major goal of it is like some niche things, but also just like early, like specific early career um, access to getting some functional research support in them. Like it's not. I'm not an expert in all these fields, and I'm working with some of the people to get those like who are more expertise to do certain things. But like it's not, it's not a. It's a different kind of a thing, and it's very targeted at like certain access to certain things and developing certain things. And it's been exciting. It's just taken a lot of work because obviously there's other stuff going on in our lives and in my life too. So, but like that's uh, a little bit of a deeper update about things. Um, so I'm kind of went up and down that paragraph, but to go back down to Nickwick, um, it's been really I really appreciate the experience of being part of that group now and like doing. I kind of came in at this point last year in terms of pre-conference, and I was like, yeah, I really want to do more this year, and I kind of been with them the whole tour, and now it's kind of the next generation, and it's just exciting to see the people who want to make that community better, and we're kind of at a little bit of a crossroads in terms of okay, do we want to just have this like 2-day event that Orel has been at for a long time, and I've been at since 2019, or do we want to have a few things like maybe a more active LinkedIn group or something that engages the community beyond just that day? And so that's sort of one thing that we're dealing with, and it's sort of the challenge, and it's kind of like a lot of open source projects, frankly, whereas you have this challenge of hey, it would be great to do this. We have people who want to do this. We have talent. We have interest. But then it's like, okay, is it sustainable? And what do you put like what do you want to build out that may wash away in the sands of time or the ever flowing time and changes? So it's like you have to be careful because if you try to build too much it flows away, then you lose all it fades out and then it looks like okay, you got it's almost like you're taking a step back even though you had all this good stuff going. So we're dealing with that part of it. And yeah, we'll see where it goes, but it continues. The core event was really great this year. I didn't attend in person. I think I showed many of the great posts, but we're still getting wonderful LinkedIn posts, particularly, but also feedback. But I'm really happy there's a LinkedIn post with people talking about their experience, getting used to talking about uh, what they did and the event. So it's like hosting these spaces that let people have these first time research experiences, that let people have a sense of community, that let people get professional and technical and some community support. Like I think that's huge, and like that I'm really happy to continue to be a part of that and hopefully continue to make the sort of on ramps and bridges to things that will matter, especially ahead. So that's kind of my wrap about that. I don't know if there's any questions, but that's uh, that's my update on those things.
No, it was great to see that paper supporting the the importance of mentorship and keeping people in STEM.
Yeah, it matters. And like I'm gonna be very vague about what I say next, but I I have been in like really good environments with really talented people and really good institutions or like good enough institutions and good enough administration. But there's just certain things that happen that turn people totally off, and it's like unless you can communicate to those people, hey, this isn't on you, this isn't your fault, or this isn't like there's forces at play that are beyond you and what your contributions matter, um, and give them opportunities to do this stuff. Like there's such a very clear, like one of the things I'd love to write more about, or like is baked into the some of the efforts that I'm doing, is like those those moments and those things really matter, because a lot of like I have very strong memories and in recent experience, or people who are like really talented, or just passionate people like who want to do great things in a field of study or in the world or whatever, and they don't quite know where to go, or they've just received a lot of like negative energy and feedback, and it's like okay, so it's basically you just like tune them out totally. So how do you deal with that as a mentor or someone, a supporter? How do you deal with that as someone who doesn't have a mentor? Like how do you, you know, all those things are kind of on those are, that's not everything I'm doing, but like they're foundational elements to like a lot of the spaces I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also just thinking of that. I think somebody shared an article somewhat recently about just how to survive in academia,
Yeah.
something. And I'm just reminded of this this tweet that the woman who won the Nobel Prize for mRNA at UPenn.
Character.
Yeah. It's just somebody was had a snippet from her book, and and it was a brutal description of academia.
Yeah.
and and sort of saying like we all know that this is true. Like there should be more mentorship for just the but somebody there was like how to survive in academia.
I don't know if it was maybe it was on Twitter.
I think it was on professional dev or maybe something. Anyway,
I don't know. I remember it, but I don't remember where it was posted. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, and then I saw this on Twitter in terms of just her. I mean, she was talking about the transition from PhD student to professor, and like what it meant to be a professor. But that there should be anyway.
Yeah.
Mentorship is important in a bunch of different levels. And it's good to remind anybody who is interested and can do this. Neuromatch is looking to match people with mentors.
Yeah, I got emails about that. Unfortunately, it's unpaid. It's not voluntary.
It is, and like so many of the positive aspects of academia, it is unpaid and your free time.
Yeah,
which says a lot about the incentive.
Yeah.
I think the mentoring, I was actually going to mention that, so I'm glad that you did, Morgan. I think the mentoring is kind of like a couple, like it's just spending an hour, like having a mentoring session. So it's not like a big commitment for what I just actually just applied to one of the things for it. Because I wasn't going to do it, but then it's like, I think I'm going to be free during one of those things. So we'll see how that, hopefully, see how that goes. I don't know. It's separate from, it's more like career. This one, there's like being a mentor, or like, I forget what they call it. There's like being the TA. I guess that's the TA.
Right? The TAs are paid position, but the mentorship is paid.
The mentorship is sort of this, like this talk about, living it. So that's cool. But yeah, shout out to NeuroMesh for trying to like. I just finished the application earlier, And I was like, oh yeah, like I had this flashback to like to 2020 and 2021 when there was the conferences and all that stuff. I was like, wow, like you guys, they're trying to. I'm not that. I don't quite understand some of their organizational structure yet. It looks like they're trying to spin off into like, hey, we can do research services too. I saw some post
Yeah.
about that. Anybody see that?
Well, yeah. So again, like I think they are trying to also come up with ways to get paid.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like
They
like
totally are.
you know, but like you said, like again, like what got them started was the community coming together and
Mhm.
saying like, hey, you know what, we can actually organize we can organize conferences in a more inclusive, humane way.
Right.
And yeah, and potentially provide coursework, provides other opportunities. I loved the old school neuromatch where it was just put us in a room and give us some questions to ask each other so that we can have a conversation and just meet people from outside your particular discipline. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Hussain, did you have an update you want to share?
Oh yeah. My apologies for being a bit MIA. I was in the meeting, had some personal stuff, so I just turned off my camera for a bit. But I've been following along. So yeah, no, yeah. Thank you all for the updates on everything, and things are going fine. So I already spoke with. I think Morgan wasn't here yesterday, but I did give some brief updates regarding the couple things I'm working on, including like my volunteer work for the startup for Alter Learning, the educational tech startup, which is so that has nothing to do with oral. I'm just working there, but things are taking off there. But more importantly, as it relates to us, excuse me, the startup with Alter Learning, things are taking off. We're now almost to the point where we're not going to be a startup, we're going to be a business. And they've confirmed, like we've got investment offers from VCs. It's about when, not if, and we're getting very, very close. But everything really depends on our ability to function and cooperate and get the job done as we need to. So, and more importantly, for this lab, I've been working with under Dr. Richard Gordon, meeting with him once a week, having some pretty strong updates between me and him. We're doing a lot of simulation work on just to briefly recap, this is on the polycapillary approach polycapillary X-ray approach to breast cancer detection, being able to optimize the performance of how we can steer dynamic X-rays by performing simulations using 2D and 3D software like MATLAB, Octave, Unreal, and see how we can adapt them to calculate and process information more effectively and take advantage of machine learning approaches like treating it as a compression problem with classification and clustering and analyses, and ultimately ultimately make breast cancer detection much more efficient, much more effective, much more easier, much more reliable. And this is definitely just something that could lead to being patented, to having a startup. That's why we're reaching out. Like Morgan mentioned somebody named Stephen Aylward as an expert in machine learning to reach out to. He has not gotten back. So basically, I'm asking if anyone knows an expert in machine learning. I posted about this in Slack last week. We're looking for in Monte Carlo simulations, excuse me. Machine learning approaches as well, but ultimately Monte Carlo simulations, so that's what we're looking for. So being able to expand things in that direction is by taking advantage of like the robust computing resources and seeing where things go and seeing where things head. Because this is really exciting, because I feel like I'm at the forefront of like publishing papers, because we are publishing book chapters and papers from this too. So I'm writing a lot as well. And it's going to be something that turns into a startup, into a venture capital idea. And that's really exciting too. So I'm being able to leverage both things as I need to. And yeah, ultimately the one thing I've learned is Octave is somehow worse than MATLAB. And Octave, I'm sorry, like it's maybe not as bad as Fortran, but it's pretty down there, pretty closely down there. If anything, I'm just trying to move over to like Julia, Python. But Julia is great, because Julia may be high level like Python, but Julia has a lot of functionality. I know if you really want to get down to lower level things, you should embrace C and C++ for maybe like a particular scripting language that has some specific ways of defining like pointer variables or um like specific structures and variables. But ultimately, what we're doing probably doesn't need to get that low. Like we're not. This isn't. But one thing I will say and point out, as it relates to like a mathematical computational theoretical approach, if it does turn out that this depends on different actual laws of physics and theoretical constructs themselves, then on some level, I might even need to make my own language to make this work. I know that sounds crazy, but it does happen. People do that, or see what needs to be done from a computer science slash programming slash scientific slash math point of view, and everything moving together, so we can make breast cancer screening more effective. See this? It's like trying to move a tree by looking at the leaves and the roots and everything all together, and you got to move that tree. So yeah. Anyways, it's really exciting, really really exciting stuff. And Dick has some. Let's just say he's like he has some interesting takes on things. I'll just say that he's quite the character to talk to. He's quite the person to talk to. Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting stuff. Exciting stuff. So I'll keep you guys posted.
Yeah, that's great.
You might try in the Slicer 3D community. I'm just trying to give you a forum where that instead of just trying one person, you can ping a community that is very radiology familiar with all the kind of things that you're the problems that that you're facing in mammography and would have good suggestions. It's a development community.
Well, just to be clear, of all the approaches to breast cancer detection, you've got ultrasounds, mammography. This is CT, computed tomography. So this differs from those. And it's ultimately that this 50% of the human population is going to benefit from this. I mean, easily among them. It's so relevant, so topical, and hard to understate its relevance. So yeah, really exciting stuff. The people I talk to about this, they always want to know is this going to make breast cancer screening, breast cancer detection easier on them? And the answer is it is. But that's what people want to hear. You got to show that. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great work. I look forward to seeing more of it when it's at a better stage or more advanced stage. And yeah, the struggles with programming languages are always a problem. If you have to kind of pick the right language for your problem, or and then don't worry about the what everyone else is using, because as it turns out, it's more problem specific.
It is frustrating. The academics. They want to learn whatever programming things they can for their scientific mathematical problems.
Yeah.
Computer scientists, like the theoreticians and the people that are more lower level, they make things for kind of different purposes.
Right.
Maybe as it could follow from the advances in hardware architecture by, the new a new computer that comes out takes advantage of, say, for example, quantum computing. Then you can actually make new programming languages based off of the new problems that you can solve by that sort of thing too.
Right.
But it's at least for myself, for my approach, I need to be asking where is this project heading? How much can I devote to different sort of tasks and aspects, and see how I can leverage those as effectively as I can. So ultimately that's where I'm going through. But realistically, given how even with advancements from the actual languages perspectives, right? With Julia, Python, R, MATLAB, Octave, all of them with their own limitations in what they can do and what can happen. If we would just benefit from something new, it's tough. It's tough to show that, but things can happen. Whatever happens. So yeah.
Yeah, it's always a challenge. I know that when I talk to Dick about a lot of the stuff he's doing with Mathematica, he's always frustrated perpetually because Mathematica is very poor support, and it allows you to do some things but not others. And so it's shifting between languages is sometimes a little tough, but sometimes you have to do it to get the sorts of things you want to do.
Yeah, I thought Octave would be easier to use. No, it's just as cumbersome and difficult as MATLAb. I mean, ideally, I would like to create like a software GUI interface. Being able to input data, everything itself as you need, specifically for this form of breast cancer computed tomography. I would like to be able to do that, and I probably wouldn't need to go so low level, other than maybe like C, C++, if that were to happen. But whatever happens, happens. So yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for that update. Looks like Erinn is here. I don't know if Erinn wants to say anything or put it in the chat or.
Hey everybody, just
Hi.
grateful to listen in. I'm having a busy morning, but I could use the intellectual stimulation while I do a bunch of chores. So I'm using you all. Thank you for sharing everything you're working on.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, thanks for attending. Yeah.
Yep.
Things are going great for you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's always good to stop by and here. Yeah, I just did a bunch of updates. I think before Erinn was here on and then just on Nickwix and Joe for mentoring things. But I'll recap those later or catch up with Erinn later for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know. Were you gonna do like papers next, Bradley, or what?
Yeah, I'm going to do a feature of several papers, and
Okay.
so yeah. Did you have anything before we do that, or?
No. I basically said what all I need to say right now, but I'll follow up with those things more ahead too.
All right. So, earlier we were going through the Neuroscience Networks channel, and we found this thread of like large language models and, kind of comparing them to brains and brain imaging and things like that. And there's this sort of field of machine learning and looking at neuroscientific data. So people have been trying to take networks as they learn, look at the weights of those networks, and then map that to like neuroimaging data. And I've actually mentored a couple projects in NeuroMatch where students were doing this, where they would take like some network, they'd train it. It was a deep learning network with a bunch of layers. They'd go to sort of some neuroscience data where you have either layers of cortex or some brain network, and there are some statistical tests you can do to see how the different layers correspond to different parts of the brain and how they process information during a task. And it's interesting work. It's not necessarily very interpretable because we don't know what that means. Does that mean that they kind of share a structure? Or does that mean that they're doing similar things? Or what does that mean? It certainly doesn't mean that they're kind of a one-to-one mapping. We know that because the brain is much more complex than a deep learning network. But we know that like there may be some shared features. And so we talked about the feature space, previously when we were talking about some of those papers where they were trying to develop this representational space, this lower dimensional space where you can understand some of the sort of features of these networks. And so it's all very hazy at this point, but there's also this discussion, and maybe it's not a very good discussion, about like how neural networks, how large language models are sentient, or how they exhibit sort of aspects of intelligence or cognition or whatever. And so that's another controversial area, but I guess it depends on that mapping between the artificial networks and maybe real brains doing things. So the reason I'm saying all this is because I'm going to present a series of papers that are going to go through sort of large language models and then biological modeling and then some other things. So why don't we get started here? I'll share my screen and get going. So this is something that Anthropic put out a couple days ago. And it's this resource on mapping the mind of a large language model. So again, like I said, we have these models and they generate we can train them on real world data, and we can generate this latent space, and we can actually analyze a brain network, and we can create a feature space there, and we can kind of map between them. We can look at different aspects of the network. The networks might share motifs or other types of features, and that's something that we can kind of draw parallels. What they're saying here is they're trying to map the mind of what a large language model is. So you have these networks that you're trying to analyze. You're trying to kind of map the mind, and this is kind of a weird. It seems a little bit weird if you think about like the history of neuroimaging and brain networks. There's this persistent history of assigning different regions of the brain to different behaviors. Sometimes it's, the face processing neurons. Sometimes it's like very high level behaviors. And sometimes it's just kind of like activations. So, what are we doing when we're mapping the mind? And that's just something to keep in mind in the back of our head. So this is by Anthropic AI. So they published this. Today we report a significant advance in understanding the inner workings of AI models. We have identified how millions of concepts are represented inside Claude Sonnet, one of our deployed large language models. So they gave it a name here. I guess it's Sonnet. This is the first ever detailed look inside a modern production-grade large language model. This interpretability discovery could, in future, help us make AI models safer. So this is where they kind of talk about this idea of interpretability. If we can map the mind of what a large language model is doing, how it's processing the training data and producing these outputs. If you prompt it, it gives you an output. How is it getting there? And if you actually look at how large language models are deployed and used, you find that a lot of times they can basically take a prompt or take some question and produce some sort of coherent text, but sometimes they make large scale mistakes, let's just say. Things like hallucinations or even misinformation in some cases. The latest Google model, people have been prompting it to get like ridiculous results. So, we want to be able to, if not avoid these things, at least know what the model is doing to, kind of safeguard against these kind of mistakes and problems. So they treat AI models as a black box. Something goes in and a response comes out, and it's not clear why the model gave that particular response instead of another. This makes it hard to trust these models. If we don't know how they work, how do we know if they won't be harmful, biased, untruthful, or otherwise dangerous in their responses? And so opening the black box doesn't necessarily help. So, you might just say, well, let's just open up the black box and look inside. But that doesn't necessarily help because the internal state of the model, what the model was thinking before writing its response, consists of a long list of numbers or neuronal activations without a clear meaning. So basically, if you have the weights, that doesn't tell you a lot because it just tells you kind of how it doesn't, you can't tell how it's reaching a conclusion by looking at the weights any more than you can look at like a neuroimaging data set, a connectivity matrix, and say that's a memory being encoded or that's an attentional gain. I mean, we can kind of make inferences about what a pattern means in data, but we can't say for sure that this is characteristic of this thing. So we can't make diagnoses necessarily. And so from interacting with a model like Claude, it is clear that it's able to understand and wield a wide range of concepts, but we can't discern them from looking directly at neurons. It turns out that each concept is represented across many neurons, and each neuron is involved in representing many concepts. And so in that sense, it's kind of like in the brain where you have, sometimes you're going to have like different type, you'll have different types of activations for the same type of activity or concept. And it's flexible, but we know that like there's maybe some basic brain regions that are involved in it. We just don't know exactly which. In the case of like neuroimaging, it could be voxels, it could be or it could be cell types, whatever. The point is that this is not like you can't give a recipe for what this, how to produce a certain output. You just have to sort of observe it, and you kind of get a sense of the sort of the first principles. Previously, we made some progress matching patterns of neural activations called features to human interpretable concepts. We used a technique called dictionary learning, borrowed from classical machine learning. So they use this term dictionary learning, which isolates patterns of neuron activations that recur across many different contexts. In turn, any internal state of the model can be represented in terms of a few active features instead of many active neurons. So instead of just using things at the neuron scale, we're looking at features. And that's how we can understand it, because I can't give you a recipe of this neuron was activated, this neuron was activated, this one was activated. It's really about the feature, and that's what we want to know. And the feature can be encoded in different sets of connections, different instantiations. But when we think about something as being interpretable, we think of it in terms of the feature, not the connection pattern. Just as every English word in a dictionary is made by combining letters, and every sentence is made by combining words, every feature in an AI model is made by combining neurons, and every internal state is made by combining features. So you have neurons that connect in a network. It makes an internal, or it creates a feature. Then features are connected to make an internal state, and those changes can be, they're sort of nested and cascading. So, like we saw with the paper before, you have these nodes, and there are things within the nodes, and things within those nodes. And if you change something at the higher level, like you change the feature, or maybe the internal state changes, the internal state can affect the connectivity of the model, which can then go back upward and affect the state, then the next state, or the evolving state, and then affect the feature. So any perturbation you make to the model can have these sort of cascading effects. And so in October 2023, they reported success applying dictionary learning to a toy language model, a very small model, using different types of linguistic data, DNA sequences, surnames and citations, nouns and mathematics, or function arguments in Python code. So going beyond just the general natural language examples to other types of sequential symbolic data. So this is, kind of going through this, and I don't want to get too much more into this, but this just kind of shows some examples of, how we parse features in these sequences of text, and abstract features, and then this nearest neighbors to the inner conflict feature. So you have these maps where you can kind of get, it's almost like sort of a conceptual map of these different states, and showing the outputs here. We have some things in the chat here as well. Let's see. So Jesse says, large mistake model, which is LMM, I guess. And then keep in mind, yeah. And then Erinn says, I wonder how consistently activation patterns ATA are used from truly representative of the population sample sizes. Yeah, I mean, the activation patterns, there's no, they don't necessarily get repeated. I mean, you get maybe similar activation patterns in networks, but it's hard to, that's kind of why, we have maybe a class of activation patterns for a feature, or as for an internal state, and then a class of internal states for a feature. It's very interesting to think about this also in terms of neuroimaging and what's going on in the brain, because we kind of think about we talk about internal states, we talk about the neurons that are involved in internal states, and in that case we have a lot of different combinations of activation patterns that could be responsible for a single internal state, but also changes in those patterns can result in changes in the internal state. So there are a lot of connections here between sort of what we can do in large language models and kind of getting these sort of broad insights into how maybe the brain manages internal states, or some of these other things, and we can look inside the model and get information out of that. So this is an interesting map. But yeah, I'm not going to get into it too much. I'm just showing you this as a sort of a way that they've kind of characterized a lot of this. So that's this publication from Anthropic. This was recently. This is another, so they're going to be, I'm going to go through a couple more articles here on kind of thinking about large language models and quantitative reasoning. So I'm going to talk about this article here where they talk about grounding reasoning with auto-formalization. And then I'm going to talk about this other one that says GPT-4 can't reason. So the reason I'm doing these two papers is because there's this sort of controversy about what you're ascribing to a model, what kinds of behaviors or abilities are you ascribing to a model. So this first paper is Don't Trust, Verify, Grounding LLM Quantitative Reasoning with Auto-Formalization. So this is where we have our large language models such as Google's Minerva or OpenAI's GPT families. These are becoming increasingly capable of solving mathematical quantitative reasoning problems. So there's one class of problem, and in this case, with the Anthropic, they're looking at a huge class of problems. This is one class of problem where they just want to know, with mathematical quantitative reasoning. So, however, they still make unjustified logical and computational errors in their reasoning steps and answers. In this paper, we leverage the fact that if the training corpus of large language models contains sufficiently many examples of formal mathematics, so in mathematics, we rely on formalizations, we rely on sort of this style of sort of proofs and things like that, where we can build, sort of these reasoning frameworks. So, in Isabel, which is a model, this is a formal theorem proving environment. So this is the kind of model that we want to sort of translate to large language models. People have worked on like scientific discovery, not in large language models, but in automated form. So that's another type of thing where you're trying to build like hypotheses and trying to do scientific reasoning in automated systems as well. So there's a history of doing this. There's automated theorem proving, et cetera, et cetera. But we're trying to incorporate this into a large language model. So if when you have a training corpus that contains sufficiently many examples of formal mathematics, those models can be prompted to translate or auto-formalize informal mathematical statements and turn those into formal Isabel code, which is what they're talking about here, which is the standard, which can then be verified automatically for internal consistency. So if you give it enough training examples of the style of sort of building theorems, then you can actually get some sort of code that's outputted that can then be internally consistent, which is, the sort of the goal of sort of reasoning is this internal consistency. This provides a mechanism to automatically reject solutions whose formalized versions are inconsistent within themselves or with the formalized problem statement. So this is where you can actually do the step of sort of sorting through things that are maybe true or not true, or, obviously not the case. Like, if I get a recipe that includes putting gasoline in a dish of like ice cream or something. So you have to train it with the structure of the problem, the type of formalism that you need. You could do this maybe with recipes as well, where you give it the style of recipe making, where you have a list of ingredients. What are the plausible ingredients? How would they go together? And you don't want to get things that are ridiculous or illogical. We evaluate our method on GSM 8K, math, and multi-arith datasets. So these are datasets that I guess involve theorem proving. I'm not familiar with them, but this is the training data, and demonstrate that our approach provides a consistently better heuristic than vanilla majority voting, the previously best method to identify correct answers. So in the theorem proving community, they use this vanilla majority voting heuristic, which gives you I gave you a decent answer. In this case, you can get a 12% increase in identifying correct answers using the GSM-8K dataset. And just as an example, so that's their benchmark. In our experiments, it improves the results consistently across all datasets and large language model sizes. And they have the code here in GitHub. So this is the code here where they kind of walk through the pipeline here where they have this informal statement. They have an informal solution. You then plug it in to this where you find this informal statement. You translate it into a formal statement. So you go from something that has a natural language basis to something that has sort of a formal statement in a computing language, or I guess a logical language. And then you go from this informal solution to this formal solution, which just gives you the steps and gives you like a formalization. And then you have these different informal solutions that you can then generate the formal statements. You have this automated theorem prover, which checks if it's internally consistent, and then it verifies it. So that's the idea here. So again, we have this paper, Don't Trust, Verify. So this says that you can do sort of this reasoning, and this is the way they're doing reasoning. In this paper, it's GPT-4 can't reason. So this is sort of a counterfactual to what we were dealing with there. And of course, we had reasoning in a very limited scope. And so in this case, this is a more general statement about the reasoning ability of a large language model. So this is specific to GPT-4. So it's not that they're saying this for all large language models, just for GPT-4. So GPT-4 was released in March 2023 to wide acclaim, making a substantial improvement over GPT 3.5. These are the OpenAI models in their iterations. However, despite the genuinely impressive improvement, there are good reasons to be highly skeptical of GPT-4's ability to reason. This position paper discusses the nature of reasoning. So going to the nature of reasoning, and this is using a natural language data set. And this is not theorem proving. This is a more general case where the model is trained on natural language on some corpus and then has to reason from that corpus. And you're not giving it a formal sort of framework for reasoning. You're just giving it data that involves maybe like informal reasoning where people make statements that are, involve reasoning, but it's not that you're giving the model explicit instructions on how to reason. So that's an important distinction. So this position paper discusses the nature of reasoning, criticizes the current formulation of reasoning problems in the natural language processing community, as well as a way in which the large language model reasoning performance is currently evaluated, introduces a small collection of 21 diverse reasoning problems, and performs a detailed qualitative evaluation of GPT-4's performance on these problems. Based on this analysis, the paper concludes that, despite its occasional flashes of analytical brilliance, GPT-4 at present is utterly incapable of reasoning, which is kind of a strong statement. But I wonder if we can look at some of these reasoning problems. So these are the test problems. This section will start with the usual caveat. GPT-4 is a non-deterministic system that might produce different answers on different runs, even with the same parameter settings. So, we can do these kind of reasoning problems, and sometimes, depending on the run, it'll give a reasonable answer, and sometimes it won't. So that's a caveat, but you can actually throw these tests at it to see if it can do these things. And that's kind of what people have been doing with some of these models. It's one of the weaknesses of large language models is that they're not consistent in their reasoning. So this one is simple arithmetic, where you have to add two numbers together and report the result. So, you query the model and you say select two random numbers and multiply them together, or you give them the numbers as a prompt and it gives you the answer. And so, so you can get the correct answer. And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So he points out here that GPT-4 is not a Turing complete framework and cannot perform general purpose computation. So it can't add, multiply, or divide. It can't sort lists. But what it can do is kind of get the answer from its training. So it can't do all the, it can't derive theorems unless you tell it to how to derive a theorem. So you have to teach it how to add, and it's not going to do it on its own because it's not Turing complete. So a calculator can do it because it's Turing complete. It can generate a number. It can do order of operations in a certain way. So this is an interesting point about models. The problem with this approach is its circularity. Planning itself requires reasoning, so this is a catch-22 situation. We can't solve reasoning by delegating to appropriate agents, because figuring out the delegation, how the problem should be decomposed, which agents to call and how to compose the results, itself is computationally infeasible. So, you have to have two components to have some reasoning capability in large language models. You need to have a training set that has examples of reasoning in it, being able to sort of understand natural language, but also these reasoning tools. And so this is where you actually also have to assume that you have, some good tools for programming the agents and a fixed collection of agents that give a reliable answer. So this is simple arithmetic, talks about simple counting, medical common sense, elementary logic, simple quantifier semantics. So this is where we have these quantifiers. This is a long section. Simple graph coloring, which is, of course, an algorithmic problem, which requires multiple steps to do. Subset sum, and that there are others. I'm not going to get into them right now. But the point is that there are a lot of tests you can throw at these models. Some of them have like multiple steps. Some of them are formalizations. And so in that sense, large language models can't reason without being trained to reason. Okay, so I have two other papers, and this departs from large language models in the sense that we have these sort of larger sets of issues. So this is the first paper here. This is by Ricard Soleil and Luis Zione on the evolution of brains and computers, the roads not taken. So we talk about large language models, and they assume sort of a von Neumann architecture, or they also assume other types of things about modern computing. So what if we were to build something like a large language model in a different paradigm? And we've talked about this in our physical computing series. We talked about some of this and how we don't need to necessarily go down the route that we've gone down with computing. There are other types of computing. And so this is a paper on sort of the evolution of brains and computers and comparing brains and computers and how that, how this could be done differently. So the abstract reads, when computers started to become a dominant part of technology around the 1950s, fundamental questions about reliable designs and robustness were of great relevance. Their development gave rise to the exploration of new questions, such as what made brains reliable. And so, brains are well known for their robustness. Neurons can die. The brain can rewire and overcome a number of, deficits like, neurons dying or neurons having to wire themselves in or changes in the connectivity of the network. So these are all things that we want to capture in our artificial models. And in some sense we can, but in a lot of senses we can't. So brains are, we know brains to be reliable. They're energy efficient. There are a lot of arguments you can make that, about biological brains that can't be matched by our current models. So, there are new questions that we can ask and how computers could get inspiration from neural systems. So people have been trying to do a lot of the bio-inspired computing space. They've been trying to mimic what the brain does and sort of mimic those mechanisms with limited success, because there's a lot we don't understand about how these features of biological brains can be sort of abstracted and then modeled and then implemented. So we got the first artificial neural networks, and those have some features of biological brains, but not a lot of them, not enough to be like really for people to be satisfied with it. Let's just put it that way. Since then, the comparative view between brains and computers has been developed in new, sometimes unexpected directions. With the rise of deep learning and the development of connectomics, an evolutionary look at how both hardware and neural complexity have evolved their design as required. So again, this is this connection between brains and models and how those are different. And maybe some of the aspects of the biological systems can be instantiated in the technical systems, but we have to figure out how to do that and what the parallels are and what the deep structure is there. In this paper, we argue that important similarities have resulted both from convergent evolution, which is the inevitable outcome of architectural constraints. So you see architectural constraints in both artificial models, technological models, and biological brains. And so there's this, I guess they're using the idea that both technological systems and biological systems evolve, and that they've sort of seen this convergent evolution to these kinds of architectural constraints. And the inspiration of hardware and software principles guided by toy pictures of neurobiology. So, the way we build our hardware and software, a lot of it in the neural network space anyways, is based on a toy picture of neurobiology. So a lot of the stuff that the inspiration from biology that we've used, and neural networks are inspired by biology. McCullough-Pitts was inspired by neurobiology. Connection machines or connectivism was inspired by neurobiology, but in a toy sense. We're not replicating the sort of the secret sauce. So this is something that we know that we're kind of hitting on something, but we don't really know what, and we're not completely hitting on what makes biological brains. Moreover, dissimilarities and gaps originate from the lack of major innovations that have paved the way to biological computing, including brains. So there are gaps or dissimilarities. There are these major innovations that happened in the evolution of biological brains that we haven't hit upon in our artificial models. As it occurs within synthetic biocomputation, we can also ask whether alternative minds can emerge from AI designs. And so we don't know that. We have we have these representations perhaps, but we don't know if they're minds. We don't know if they have, if you can build multiple representations of minds or anything like that. Here we take an evolutionary view of the problem and discuss the remarkable convergences between living and artificial designs, and what are the preconditions to achieve artificial intelligence. So this is from the journal Entropy. This belongs to the special issue Foundations of Biological Computation. So if you want to know more, you can read the article or look at the special issue. It looks like a really interesting special issue. It looks like we have some basic review of some of these concepts, some of the parallels between artificial systems, bio-inspired artificial systems, and biological brains. So the second paper is the development of human causal learning and reasoning, and this is Mario Kegodu and Alison Gopnik. So this is developmental psychology is applied to sort of this problem of learning and reasoning. And so this is from Nature Reviews Psychology. And so this is, let's just go through the abstract. I don't think I have access to this paper actually. So the abstract reads, causal understanding is a defining characteristic of human cognition. Like many animals, human children learn to control their bodily movements and act effectively in the environment. Like a smaller subset of animals, children intervene. They learn to change the environment in targeted ways. So when they talk about sort of this reasoning aspect, one of this is the intervention into the world by an agent. So you're learning to change the environment in targeted ways. And that's part of the, this interactive aspect of reasoning. You have to interact with the world. You have to learn about the world and interact with it and do these sorts of things. So it's not just about learning a formal framework. In an agent that, reasons, there's probably this embodied aspect, this developmental aspect where you're learning the rules of the environment, you're learning the rules of the world, and you're maybe making changes and seeing what the consequences are. Unlike other animals, human children grow into adults with the causal reasoning skills that develop abstract theories. So, animals, non-human animals will do this, humans will do this in terms of the children or the juveniles. But in humans, we also use abstract theories to interpret the reasoning so we develop reasoning skills, but then we build these abstract theories. And so this is something that's unique to humans, and something that I guess people I'm not going to get into how they're represented on large language models, but large language models will come up with theories, but they're not very good. Sometimes they're conspiracy theories. So, and not saying that humans don't do that as well, but it's kind of interesting to see kind of the consequences of reasoning and interacting with data. So human children, will develop abstract theories, invent sophisticated technologies, and imagine alternate pasts, distant futures, and fictional worlds. In this review, we explore the development of human-unique causal learning and reasoning from evolutionary and ontogenetic perspectives. So they're taking this developmental perspective, but also an evolutionary perspective, comparing across human and non-human animals. We frame our discussion using an interventionist approach. First, we situate causal understanding in relation to cognitive abilities shared with non-human animals. We argue that human causal understanding is distinguished by its depersonalized, objective, and decontextualized general representations. Using this framework, we next review empirical findings on early human causal learning and reasoning, and consider the naturalistic context that supported development. Then we explore connections to related abilities. We conclude with suggestions for ongoing collaboration between developmental, cross-cultural, computational, neural, and evolutionary approaches to causal understanding. So this is something, sort of a framework for AI, that we don't have these sorts of approaches to understanding incorporated in our view of AI. What maybe we have is, at best, being able to train our models on these sort of logical frameworks, or something that's easy to sort of give the rules to the model, and then it can follow the rules. But these sort of interactive things like developmental approaches to causal understanding, or evolutionary approaches, those are cross-cultural approaches. Those are lacking in our models. So I hope that gave you a good sense of where I was trying to go with that, making those sort of parallels between human systems, animal biological systems, and computational models, but also sort of in that reasoning domain, how those things can be approached and what we have and what we don't have.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm gonna have to go back and look at that because I appreciate what you were trying to do, and I didn't really get to grasp all of it there. But no, thank you for that.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I love the first one in terms of just bringing Isabel into the loop, in terms of, again, that project, that deep algebra project proposal from like 2016 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like it's yeah. So interested to follow up on that, just in terms of how that gives you an interesting benchmark for things.
Yeah.
Right. I dropped a link in DataSci ML about this new French LLM company, and one of the things what leapt out at me was not, like the fact that more people are willing to, put billions of dollars into starting up an AI company is not surprising. But that they were pitching it as agentic AI, and their description of it was that it knows how tasks are composed, and it can break them down into subcomponents, right? And which certainly sounds like reasoning, or like again, just the brief view I had of that second paper in terms of how it was trying to define reasoning, which I think would also gets back to the Francois Chollet, like do we actually know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
And again, it's just it's so many of these things are only as good as the benchmarks that we have for them, and our descriptions are very, very uninformative. But
of course, the compositionality is the thing that they tout in neuro AI. That there's this aspect, and this is a developmental thing that you can really kind of get at with development, is how to put together tasks or how to put together information in these logical steps or this formalization that give you this ability to read it.
And one of the things that I was pushing at the whole brain emulation, was just like a kind of a variant on the everything in biology needs to be understood in the light of evolution. It's just like everything in the adult brain needs to be understood in the light of that it developed.
Yeah.
Right. And so putting all this effort in terms of scanning and imaging an adult brain, like you're missing all that developmental context for how like leaving aside that you're still not capturing physiology, but just you're not capturing how those structural elements got in the places that they did and why. Which is that development story. And you'll be happy to know that I also was just like I've heard a lot of people talk about neuro AI, and I haven't seen a good example of what neuro AI is, except in this kind of hand wavy sense that like these mathematical abstractions are inspired by neurons, right?
Right.
And again, this is why I love the idea that we talk about artificial molecular machines, so that we get away from like we don't need neurons. Like they're not super special. But just also like nobody's brought up developmental AI. And I think that just and I'd love to put that into context with Charles Martin's Weight Watchers, in terms of the potential for both structure and functional phase changes. To like trying to use more Soleil kind of terms, that you could have very different dynamics as the system evolves, if that system undergoes phase changes, right? And now the governing equations for that system are fundamentally different. There's still it's still a system existing in the world and still solving problems, but like its own internal representations of those its internal representations have fundamentally changed. And again, like capturing it at a particular time point would miss that.
Well, that's something we go over in the EGRT paper, like that
Okay.
example. Yeah, but I mean, that's an interesting point because we talk about out of distribution things that we want to identify, and that's certainly a problem when you have a system that has like phase transitions and systems that are stochastic. How do you know, like when there's a change, you know what the change looks like, but those changes sometimes are unique. Sometimes you don't know about them until they happen. So there are a lot of things that you can't do with an artificial system and those kind of. I mean, at least with a human, you can barely understand it. You have to sort of reason about it, and sometimes the reasoning is wrong. The way people have interpreted rare events in the past, like when you would look up and see an eclipse and you wouldn't know what it was and you have to kind of invent a story around it, but if you see enough eclipses you kind of figure out what it is, and it relies on this historical knowledge, this sort of integration of that and other things as well as reasoning. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And I was trying to also, like people were willing to talk about quantum.
yeah.
and I was just like, well, I think the most relevant quantum analogy is just that is that we're 4D objects.
Right.
Like we exist in time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we are wave packet that is changing over time. and yeah, any 3D description is fundamentally lacking. Anyway.
So Jesse pointed out in the chat that we should do maybe a position paper about developmental AI, or at least I think that'd be a good idea because we don't think we have that like right now.
I say this almost like I feel like I'm in this conversation. I feel like I'm in this. I don't think wormholes were the right way, but like I feel like I'm in a conversation with like 2022 and 2021. Like we've had this like, and we've had, hey, maybe we should really demarcate this space in developmental AI or whatever. And I'm not trying to be like petty or sarcastic or whatever. It's more like I want like I'm thinking like what could we constructively do here? Like what kind of paper would that even look like right now? Or like would it just be sort of like a position of like here's some tenants we think would be important in this space, or like here's what we're seeing missing. Like Morgan just said, like, oh, like there's nothing about this developmental approach, like something like that, or I don't know what people is it can still just be like, oh well, this is still nice and we don't have anything to say yet. Like I don't, that's fine too. I just don't know.
Well, I think maybe what's missing, because we don't, we're not proposing like the latest state of the art, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have some ideas about like what's missing, and sometimes you can say what's missing, and it can be very vague. And sometimes you can really target what's missing in terms of what do we need to do, like very specifically. I don't know how to put it any better than that, but basically the negative experiment, or like sketching out maybe future experiments, or sketching out like a very specific set of principles. It's almost like if you were doing theory and you were making predictions, or you were laying out a formalization. So yeah, I mean that might be something. We'll have to think about how to do that. But I guess if it were easy, it would have been done already, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it would really be it'd be good to talk about it though.
Yeah.
I mean, just in terms of I don't know, maybe even just thinking about how again, trying to take a perspective that others aren't taking.
Right. Yes.
Right. And one of them might be, the various iterations of ChatGPT. Right. How much should ChatGPT try to understand its previous iterations.
Yeah.
For instance, and just again thinking about Piagetian stages, and somewhat again putting things in a context of continual learning. There was this unstated, but I felt like everybody assumed that like AGI, AGI when it comes is going to be complete.
Right.
Right. It's just no such object exists in the world.
Right.
So again, like it's I think there's just a number of ways that we can kind of ground it and try and look with some perspective in a Marcus kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's certainly not enough of the it keeps on going for these benchmarks where you're showing performance on things, and not enough in terms of where the failure modes, and those failure modes are actually where kids are learning.
Yeah.
Too, and how important it might be for a continual learning system to understand the limitations of its previous models.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's great. Let's leave it there for now, and let's think about that more. So yeah, thanks. Another great meeting. Keep in touch on Slack and everything, and see you next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.